In the 90s, Playmates Toys made the deepest line of Star Trek action figures in history. My name's Keith, and I'm a collector working towards owning all 284. I've been a Trek fan for almost 35 years, and most people are sick of me talking about it. But somehow I've convinced my old friend Mike to review them with me on Look at My Star Trek Toys! Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Look at My Star Trek Toys. We have another exciting episode of action figures of me showing Mike. I'm Keith. That's Mike. We talk about Star Trek toys. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing good, Keith. I say we jump right into it.
You're so excited. You're frothing at the mouth to talk about Star Trek Voyager toys. But I should say this. Look, before we get into it, Playmates didn't make a ton of Star Trek Voyager figures. And okay. I certainly wish that they had. But of course, as time went on, as they started to filter out, as the line stopped selling quite as well, the Deep Space Nine and Voyager, they kind of got the short shrift. And so there are no, or very few, Voyager toys from later in the seasons. So we have a lot of toys from the first 2 or 3 seasons, but there's a ton of missing figures from the latter parts of Star Trek Voyager, which, I think are universally considered the best parts of Star Trek Voyager. But nonetheless, we will persist to show you the toys, starting.
Well, that brings up an interesting point when you talk about licensing, right? Because even if a show improves in its later seasons, I'm not just talking quality, even if the viewership improves, if the toys aren't selling, then there's less, they're not going to make the toys. You know what I mean? It's not always tied directly to the popularity of the show, obviously.
Well, and especially in Playmates sense, Playmates made some errors that had nothing to do with the show, with the production of the show, with the ratings of the show, that really hurt the sales of their toys. And it's been talked about ad nauseum on the YouTubes and the internets, but them releasing figures that were impossible to get, and the collectors who needed to have a complete collection couldn't. So at that point, after the 1701s happened, what's the point in buying these Voyager figures if I can't have all of them? So it's not always related to the show or even the license. It can be a lot of different factors can happen in the production of the toys that prevents them from getting made. But I think we should take this opportunity to look at our first toy that was made, and that is figure number 16460, Ensign Seska. Let's have her beam in. Of course, this is from Star Trek Voyager. All of these are from Voyager. And this is right from the first season. This is Martha Hackett playing the character of Seska, who, if you're paying attention at home, of course, was a member of the Maquis who joined the crew of Voyager, and took her a while to settle in. In fact, she wore blue as a sciences person in the before she was transferred to gold in operations. Now we'll find out. There's both a practical and a canon version for that happening. One, the practical version from the standpoint of producing the series, they had a lot of the secondary characters. They didn't have a plan for them yet. They hadn't really developed each of the characters fully. So, they might start in sciences and end up in operations. And we saw that on Next Gen a lot too, especially in the season 1. So we did a lot of uniform hopping as time went on. But also in canon, the members of the Maquis weren't members of Starfleet. And so we were figuring out what role should they be playing on the Enterprise, on Voyager. What can they do? What division should they be in? So it's not necessarily surprising that she would be changing her uniform. That's not the only thing she changed, and we're going to get to that later. So at this point, she appeared to be Bajoran. We've talked about the Bajorans a little bit before in Deep Space Nine, and of course, a species right next to Deep Space Nine. But here they are. I'll say one more thing about Martha Hackett before I turn over the figure to you, Mike. She was already at this point a veteran Star Trek actor. She also played Tyrell, the Romulan on Deep Space Nine, in a very important but short-lived character, but an important one at the beginning of the Dominion War. So talk to me here about Ensign Seska, Mr. Indeglio.
Well, we've mentioned this in some of the other figures. This is a subtle alien, if you will. So it's just the sort of sculpting of the nose, but that's well sculpted. I think her hair is the bun is well sculpted. Outside of that, it's well bunned. It's cool. It's a classy figure. I think this one's a pretty easy one to articulate and set into a pose to fit into a display or whatnot. Nothing jumping off the page, but I don't think it's meant to. I think it's a pretty solid. I don't know the character, so it's hard to kind of interpret anything about it. But good one. Good simple figure.
Well, and it was also simple. And if we hop over to Toy Cam,
oh boy,
fingers crossed, we can take a look at the figure itself. And this is a reuse of the female Starfleet officer body that we see a lot, which had some upsides and downsides. One, it's not really specific to a character. It's just this is the female one. And you'll note if we get close in, if I can aim it. Come on, Keith, you can do it. Her pips here are painted as opposed to sculpted, which allows them to repaint many different ranks onto this figure. All you have to do is paint the hands and the shoulders to whatever division you want them to be, and pop on ahead. So obviously it being a little generic is annoying. However, it also allows you this is the fully articulated figure. So you can bend the knees, you can turn the feet in and out, which is a really nice addition to it. And the same thing with the arms. You can go up and down at the elbow, but you can also turn the arm with the second layer of articulation mid-arm, which that'd be really handy if we had one of those. But it replaces the need for a shoulder, is if we had articulations halfway down our arm like that. So it's a good figure to have, and there's no reason not to make this figure, right? Because you don't have to make it in a huge, you don't have to make 300,000 of them, and it's not that expensive to produce because you're really just molding a head and doing a paint. So I'm glad to have it because it also is an important step along the way in the in the storyline of Seska, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But first, we're just going to take a quick look at this box here. Very simple box. She came with a card, some choking hazards. Any thoughts on the Star Trek Voyager Series 2 box, Mike?
It's cool. Yeah. It's a normal design. I don't think they were going for it. Nothing creative on the sort of structural setup. It's not triangular like one we looked at. I believe it was
the warp factors.
Video. Yeah.
Yep.
But cool. They always have very decent, I feel, very decent graphic design. I can't see the back here, but I assume, they share other figures in the line.
I like it. It's the painting. It is sort of like a painting of the ship. Looks a little bit more realistic than the sort of more comic booky of the Next Generation Series 1 and 2. So it's sort of splitting the difference between doing an actual photograph or a digital recreation of the ship. So it's a painting, but it's a little bit more detailed, which I like a lot. And it has action, it has movement to it. Just from a graphic design standpoint, I really like the back image that they have there. And the placement of the ship to get it so it's not in front of or not behind the figure. And also not having a lot behind the figure in the plastic there, so you can see more of that painting behind it. So pretty cool. I mean, the choking hazards, as usual, are just sort of an afterthought. Why are they purple? It's because they had a lot of purple plastic kicking around, so that's what they did. So, and now you'll notice on the box there's a little bit of a boo-boo. Can you spot the boo-boo, Mike?
Let me see if I can spot the boo-boo.
It's in text. There is a text boo-boo. I'll rescue you. Look at Seska's rank on the card versus the back of the box.
Oh,
She's been promoted.
Interesting.
Her for her Skybox collector's card, she got promoted to lieutenant, but on the box itself, she's an ensign. And also, if you look under Ensign Seska, there's a bit of a spoiler here on the figure. Because if you can't read it there because it's too small, it says Cardassian agent. Holy spoiler,
Interesting. Wow.
Batman. And this feels like a great opportunity to do our next figure because we're continuing a story. We're doing storytelling, Mike. And that is figure number 16022, Cardassi-ish Seska. Oh my goodness. So we found out as the series progressed that Seska was not Bajoran. In fact, she was Cardassian, which is the Bajorans' sort of enemy species on Deep Space Nine, who had infiltrated the Maquis, who were battling the Cardassians. But so she was basically an undercover agent with the Maquis, and then whoops, you're on the other side of the galaxy. Now what you gonna do? Well, what you're gonna do is you're gonna keep being evil because the Cardassians are evil. And so she reveals herself to be Cardassian, and she never transitions all the way back to her Cardassian appearance. She sort of splits the difference because they didn't have the good plastic surgeons over in the Delta Quadrant. So I don't think they necessarily explained why she was only halfway back to being Cardassian. But guess what? Not only does she turn out to be Cardassian, she turns out to be like a super bad guy and teams up with some of the bad guys in the Delta Quadrant, causes all sorts of trouble. Teams up with the Kazon, causes trouble, tries to have Chakotay's baby, and or does have Chakotay's baby, because guess what? They were hooking up before she turned evil, and but she did a genetic scan to get the baby. There's the baby there. And so there's a whole big twisty twist that, guess what? It didn't end very well for most of the folks there. So this figure is her with her sort of half Cardassian-ness, with her civilian clothes after she had left Voyager. Yeah, Mike, what do you think before we talk about articulation and such?
I think it looks cool. I like the hair sculpt. I like the positioning. I dig the costuming actually, and it's very, it's funny, for as plain Jane or as simple or as sort of just cheap as some of the costume sculpting is on some of these figures, other times, like now, it's really detailed. It's really specific. Even on the sculpting on her undershirt underneath that really cool overshirt type thing, you can see sort of some ribboning and some cool stuff. The check string on her gauntlets or bracelets or sleeves is really cool. This is like a really well-designed and executed action figure from an artistic standpoint. I think it's super cool.
And I think it's very interesting that they put so much work into this figure. I mean, I guess they must have been thinking it was going to be more popular than it was. Seska as a character, I think they thought was going to be one of the big bads, and then people weren't really responding to it, so spoiler alert, they might have killed her off before Voyager did its transition to being more of a Borg-oriented series. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Kazon in our next episode, but those early storylines. But if we go back to Toy Cam and take a look at this figure, there's some interesting things about it, because much like Seska's main Starfleet figure, this had full articulation, which they built into a single figure. So this wasn't a reuse of a body of somebody else, and there's no way they could reuse this body for another character. But you have the whole elbow articulation in both directions. You have the same thing going on with the legs, able to turn her feet in and out and articulate at the knees. And even the head was able to move a little bit, as much as her hair helmet would allow her to. And you can see the sort of Cardassian ridges and the sort of spoon thing on the forehead, they put a lot of effort into Seska's figure here. It's pretty interesting. So, yeah. So that's Seska. And you can see in her box there, see, her choking hazards there are gray, which I think, because I was saying in a previous episode that Worf had some silver ones or some gold ones. The gray makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, the gray makes sense to me because all the Star Trek pads and they're iPads before iPads, they were all gray, and so were the phasers, and so were the tricorders and such. I think they could have just gone and made all the choking hazards that color if they weren't going to paint them. Because when they're like green and red and purple, it just pulls me out of it because you bothered to paint the figure correctly.
I get that, but I wonder if it's twofold. I don't know. I'm speculating two things. One could just simply be, like we said in a previous episode, a financial decision. They've got extra purple plastic or whatnot, whatever it may be. Or, there are people on that team that are not Super Trek people. They are creatives who are all about design and color and are looking at the figure as a whole and saying, oh, the palette really calls for a purple here. And sometimes they win those decisions. They win those battles, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. No, I would be curious to find out how those decisions were made. And why have them at all? It's very strange to me, and we certainly don't see these in more contemporary figures for lots of different reasons. But I have a giant box just filled with loose choking hazards, and I don't know I'm not going to do anything with them. I'm not going to throw them out, obviously, but I'm also not going to display them because it would just be like this huge ocean of weird little plastic bits on my shelf. And I feel like that's probably true of most people. Folks, if you're watching this, and I would love to know, what do you do with your choking hazards? What do you do with all the bits and bobs? And other than the phaser or whatever, you have a character on the shelf holding the phaser. That makes sense. But all the rest of the little stuff, do you keep it? Do you not? Do you display it? How do you display it? I'd be really curious to find out what your experience with all those things are. So, I think we should move forward and talk about our experiences with the next figure, and that is figure 16461, Lieutenant Joe Carey. Here he is, Lieutenant Joe. It's Lieutenant Joe Carey from Voyager Series 2. This was a character played by Josh Clark, who interestingly only did 7 episodes of Voyager. He was an actor who we'd seen on Star Trek before a little bit. He was an extra on season 1 of The Next Generation. You can see him in Worf's spot in the episode Justice. But he became a character on Voyager as we moved forward. And in the beginning of the series, he was the acting chief engineer. Because as we talked about in the pilot of Voyager, when they got thrown over to the Delta Quadrant by the caretaker, half of their crew got killed off. And so Lieutenant Carey was an engineer, and he took over the chief engineering job briefly before being replaced, of course, by B'Elanna Torres, who was a member of the Maquis, but was an engineering wunderkind. And so it was an early storyline, as you saw some of the Starfleet folks being outranked by the Maquis at various points and having their jobs taken over. So he was sort of an early point of conflict in the transition as the combining of the two crews in Voyager. So before I tell you the fate of our good friend Lieutenant Joe Carey, why don't you talk to us about the figure here? It's cool. His hair is pretty cool and textured. I'm a little caught up right now in the fact that, like, no disrespect to Josh Clark here, but he looks significantly older here than he does in his baseball card and in the figure modeling itself. What am I missing?
Well, that's a very good point. The screenshot is actually from season 7 in his at the end of the run of the series. So, look, time comes for us all, sir.
Yeah, the presidency will age you.
That's true. So he was so that was season 7. He only did 7 episodes, but he, as a character, stayed in canon on the ship. He was missing for several seasons, and he was actually killed off in the episode Friendship 1. Both the character and the figure, it's Joe. What I mean? It's pretty, and this is had no reflection on Josh Clark's performance of the character, but he was just like sort of standard white guy. Mm-hmm. And the figure reflects that. And I think it's interesting that they made a figure of Lieutenant Carey.
I mean, you could literally stick a white coat on that and be like, oh, it's a Doogie Howser figure.
It could be any number of things.
Yeah.
I think the reason they made it, if we go back to Toy Cam, it's the same reason they made Seska in his Starfleet figure, because this is one of their standard male Starfleet figures who they just popped a head on, and then it's Carey. And, the same thing. You don't have the pips molded, they're painted. So you have, generic figure, paint in the pips, throw a head on it, and we're going to sell it for full price. And I think that's kind of what happened here. That said, look, I'm a guy who I want a figure of like every character that's ever been on anything. I want figures of the extras, right? But I don't necessarily want to pay full price for them if they were practically a speaking extra. So it's it's an interesting figure. It's important to fill it out. If you need a Voyager era red shirt to, you might get eaten by some horrible monster on your planet.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Keith, because the more I think about it, this goes for our whole show in all of these toys, but some more than others. I can't imagine if you looked at the demographics of Voyager, right?
Right.
That there were many children watching, right? So you're probably talking, 21 to 35-year-old men are probably the main demographic of the show, my guess, if I had to guess.
There were a lot of kids. Kids have always watched Star Trek, but yeah,
I'm talking market
a lot
share,
of it's
right? Like, what are they? So a toy company generally is designing toys for kids, but in this case, like you said, I think they saw the majority of their market was people collecting like you,
right?
Which brings up interesting questions on both sides. One, why do they choose certain figures? Like you said, can they cut costs and just use rando parts, or why aren't they making the more sought-after, desirable ones? I guess, since they had some stumbles, as you mentioned, there's a lot of calculations taking place. There's so much goes into it. It's fascinating. Yeah. I wish I had more answers, but it's fun to talk about the questions.
Yeah, well, it has been proposed to us by folks that we reach out to some of the original designers at Varner Studios. And I think we may try to do that, because I would love to have some of these questions answered and to, I don't know, appreciate their work to them because they did some really, really terrific work. But I got questions. Too.
Yeah, I'd like to know, not just like visually and artistically, because that's where the majority of my kind of questions lie, because you and I are creative people, so I think that's where my passion lies. But also just the calculations, like before it even trickles down to the creatives, right? Who's making the decisions? What figures? Like, when you get the license, do you get the license to all the figures? Do you get the license for just a number of figures? Do you get to choose? Does the network choose? How does that all go? How does it all work?
Yeah.
I'd love to know.
Yeah, well, and from the production standpoint, and how much lead time do they get? They put out Voyager Series 2, and all of a sudden, like, wait, 7 of 9's on the show now? They didn't even know about it. Right. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So it's interesting from all of those levels. Well, you want to know what else is interesting? Our next figure, and that is figure number 16466, Maquis Chakotay. Here is Chakotay, of course, played by Robert Beltran, wearing his Maquis uniform, his space pirate uniform, in the pilot of Voyager, although we would see this again in a fascinating episode from season 4 called Worst Case Scenario. I won't give it away, but it's one of my favorites. Really, really fun. So this figure basically represented, because as I mentioned before, he was the captain of the Maquis ship and became the first officer on Voyager. And so when we first met all the Maquis characters, they weren't wearing Starfleet uniforms. They were wearing whatever they wanted to wear because, they were pirates. So you get to wear what you want to wear when you're a pirate. That's just how it goes. So here we are with what Chakotay chose to wear on his personal time. So talk to me, Mike. What do you think of this figure?
I think it's cool. We've talked about Chakotay before. As subtle as the sort of head tattoo is, I do dig it. I think it's cool. I think it's a cool touch.
Super
I actually
cool.
I sort of like this uniform from the boots all the way to the stitching. I sort of wish this is one where I wish we could pump some money into it and really make that sort of a faux leather. That would be super cool. That jacket or the sort of the vest type of thing. Just feel like you could really do something and then accent the holster and the waist strap. But then again, now we're getting into wishes. It's cool. The undershirt is a little less ornate than what it seems like the character design was. I wish that they had maybe painted that, maybe thought outside the box a little bit on that. But outside of those little quibs, I think it's cool.
Yeah, the undershirt is my quibble here because on the show, and you can see on the screenshot there, those stripes were not nearly as bright and ridiculous as they are in the figure. The figure itself looks like Popeye or something.
I was just going to say, Popeye. It looks like Popeye or Mork from Mork and Mindy.
Yeah, I don't know. Those stripes make the figure look silly to me. And this is I love Chakotay. I love the character. I think this figure could be cool, but those stripes are why it lives on the bottom shelf on my shelf because it looks silly. He looks like he's gonna, sell me some popcorn shrimp, and that's not really what the character is, and that's not even what they did on the show. So right. I don't know. Again, I think it goes back to the demographics. Like, are you trying to sell these to kids? Maybe they want a little brighter color, or something like that. But there it is. We can see the box there, and again, the green weird choking hazards. Even his phaser is green. It doesn't make any sense.
What is the time? Like, when do they take these promo shots for these baseball cards? That doesn't look like them at all either.
I bet you that is a promo shot from the pilot, from the very beginning, and that obviously is a pose. That's not a screenshot from the
as
show.
We know, Keith. Spoiler alert, because this episode we will maybe look at some early promotional shots taken before production even. So sometimes before character descriptions are finished, we've got shots. Casting is done prior to even that. So
in a very special episode that we're going to drop at some point, we're going to drop a very special episode when we don't have time to film a regular one. It's our emergency episode. So if we drop that one, we had to pull in case of emergency. So stay tuned. Let's find out how long it takes us to not be able to record an episode like we planned.
I like that episode, but
it's great. No, it's going to be super fun. All right. So if we continue to look at this figure, it also, if you go back to Toy Cam again, since we're doing that, this one, like the Seskas and like Carey, has full articulation. So I feel like Playmates went through a cycle where they improved the articulation up until Warp Factor, where they dialed it way back down. So I imagine that they were, they're getting better and better because Series 1 didn't have the arm, the sort of shoulder articulation. And then they probably realized, well, that's a huge pain in the ass. And let's pretend we're not doing that anymore. So, which is why you have the later ones have worse articulation than the mid-series ones, which is a bummer. And I think a lot of fans are bummed out by that. So they have these weird wide stances that don't make any sense and bad articulation. So that's just, that's what it is. I think that's when you come down to budgetary problems, as the series itself is running out of steam. That's where you cut corners. You cut corners, not allowing your characters to make corners with their limbs. So let us go to our finale with a figure you're going to like. You're going to be totally jazzed for this figure. Even though, speaking of things like on the production side, why did we only see this for like half of one episode? What the hell? Let's do figure 65104 Swarm Alien.
Yeah!
Look at that.
Damn. That is cool, yo.
Look at all of the pieces and the crazy like thing sticking out of the side of his butt and his shoulders.
Yeah, but just even like the sort of like exposed brain. I mean, the sculpting is insane.
It is such a cool figure, and it's a swarm alien. This is a Warp Factor 2 series. So the Warp Factors, they started out with good articulation and lost it. This Swarm Alien was played by an uncredited stunt guy named Chuck Borden, and it is from the episode of Voyager, The Swarm, but only seen in this one episode. And it wasn't even like the main feature of the episode. This alien design came and went on Voyager, and I don't understand it. There must have been some production reason why they couldn't use these guys a ton.
I guess what I also don't understand is, do they ever sit down? Because it doesn't look like they ever could sit down.
Well, here, you know what? Go to Toy Cam. Let's see if we can sit this guy down. So he can. There, look, he can pop a squat.
You ever want to see Swarm Alien take a crap?
There
it is.
There it is. Yeah, it's a little. Yeah, you're totally right. I was gonna say it's on the side of his butt, but it's just the full butt. So it's be very comfortable to sit on the ground without a chair, because you have the little butt support you're really hoping for from your monster alien costume. So it's interesting. They very much look like the face looks like the mask worn by the creators in Alien. So that I think we borrowed a little bit from that, but nonetheless, this if we go back to Toy Cam, we can see again this had a lot of articulation. It didn't have the ability to turn out the legs, but you do have the shoulder articulation in the arms, and are able to turn at the waist. So there's a lot going on with this figure. It's also big and thick and heavy. So if we put him up against like Carey there, you're getting a lot more plastic for your buck when you get this figure here. So talk to me. How would you use a swarm alien in your daily life, Mike?
It's awesome. I think it would be definitely have at least in our universe would have been a champion for a while, big bad guy champion. It is cool. And it's weird that they have such a cool figure, and like you said, it wasn't on the show more. I even like the kind of like it doesn't have as many. This is what I like to see. Sometimes I even credit them on their sort of minimalist alien design. They kind of just have like small changes, but when they go for it, it's always cool.
Yeah, and I think there's again a production element there. I mean, the reason the Bajorans only have a little ridge on their nose is because that was going to be a major species on the show, and so you're going to have your main actors as well as other actors. It saves them countless hours in the makeup chair, right? If you're just putting a little goober on your nose, then a Nana Visitor can be done in the makeup chair in a half an hour, as opposed to 4 or 5 hours, what this guy probably had to go through. And when you're doing that times 10 different characters on a show for an episode, that just becomes an ungodly amount of work. But in a case like this, this is more like the Borg, right? Where you have an occasional alien with a super cool outfit, and they built that. I mean, obviously that's not a hard shell that looks like some sort of a fabric, a stuffed fabric thing in the picture there. But again, that picture from the screenshot from Voyager there, that's been brightened from the actual image so we can see the costume design better, but it looked amazing on screen. So that's just suit. Throw a mask on. I don't know why these folks didn't come back. It was an odd production decision there. But we were about to have the Borg show up on Voyager. We had the Hirogen. We had a whole mess of super cool, badass adversaries on Voyager coming up. So it is probably they just didn't want to compete with some of the plans they had for other aliens. And here's the other problem from a production standpoint. They can't talk through that mask. And so you can't see their eyes and they can't speak through that mask, or at least there's no place to move the mouth.
So you're limited plot-wise.
So you're very limited from a standpoint of talking, but they certainly could have made these guys like the soldiers for the people who talk, sort of like they did on Deep Space Nine with the founders and such. So anyway, so there it is. And you can see the figure itself, whoever did the sculpting on this figure got really excited to do this one, because the figure has way more detail than the actual thing on screen did. So frequently we'll see a figure that has less detail than what we see on screen. This one had more detail because I bet they were just pumped to make this figure.
Oh, for sure. Keith, if people were pumped watching our show and wanted to write an email to us and say, hey, what's up? How could they go about and do that?
Well, I could tell you, you could just email us directly at lookatmystartrektoys@gmail.com. I check it. I love it. I'm so psyched to hear from you. We're seeing some of your custom figures. We're seeing your displays. We're seeing your setups. It's really cool. It's just fun chatting with everybody. You can also leave a note right down below. And while you're leaving a note, I mean, like and subscribe, obviously. That really, really helps us, because this only works if people watch it, right? Otherwise, it's just an odd behavior. So by all means, help people find the show, like and subscribe, comment below. You can also find us on Instagram at Star Trek Toys. Very simple,
Easy peasy.
at Star Trek Toys. And we'll talk with you there, and we will continue doing our little show till we run out of figures, but we're going to start showing some of your customs, some of your displays. We might do some other Star Trek toys. We might do some other Star Trek stuff.
Memorabilia?
We'll see. Memorabilia, show off the some of our fun other toys. So, So thank you so much for watching. We will be back next week with Star Trek Voyager Guests and Alts, Part 2. Right here on the YouTubes. Till then, it has been...
Look at my Star Trek toy!